This is my video about solving Yu-Gi-Oh's new player problem. So Yu-Gi-Oh definitely has a new player problem, and if you're not aware of the problem, I would highly recommend watching Raren's video where he goes through and tries to learn Yu-Gi-Oh himself as a Hearthstone player. If you don't want to watch the whole video though, you can watch MBT's review video of Raren's video, which does a pretty good job illustrating the points he makes about the new player problems in Yu-Gi-Oh! The brief summary of the video is that Yu-Gi-Oh! Is extremely hard to learn as a new player unless you are already been introduced to the game by somebody else who is already familiar with the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! This, however, especially nowadays, is not good enough for you to learn a game from somebody who already knows it, because that already works for every other game that you could already have somebody else teach you. There are lots of other ways you can teach a player the game without having someone else to explain it, solved by many other card games. Magic, for example, has a very gradual learning curve that helps introduce a player to higher and higher levels of play slowly over their time playing the game. Where most players start playing Magic is on the kitchen table, maybe with a parent, maybe with a friend, maybe with a sibling. You're going to start playing Magic because you think it's cool to play and you want to try it out. Magic cards almost all work for this kitchen table level of play, but it's definitely noteworthy that Magic prints cards for Timmies or players who want some big, splashy, cool effect that may not be very competitively viable. The natural progression from playing on kitchen table is playing Commander. This way you can fit more people into playing at the same time, as it's a multiplayer format and it's still relatively casual but has a more focus on bigger effects or longer lasting games, giving you more access to the game than you would if you were just playing for the first time. Commander does an alright job not only establishing the large collection of cards that you are allowed to play within the game of Magic the Gathering, but also can help introduce you to new people, as by being a multiplayer format, you will encounter lots more players if you're playing Commander at something like a local game store. It's also noteworthy to mention that the price amount that you put into the game increases over time as you play the game more and more. Kitchen table, you just play with any cards you happen to pick up. Commander, they have pre-constructed Commander decks that you can build, but almost any card is playable in the Commander format. This proceeds to Limited, which is a format where you have to bring literally nothing, but you do have to pay an upfront cost to play in a limited event. A limited event allows players to play with many cards that would not normally see play in constructed formats, as they are a lot weaker, but it also gives you an understanding of what the new cards coming out from Wizards of the Coast are at that moment. Limited is also noteworthy for the Magic the Gathering pre-releases, which happen before a set is released, allowing players to get access to the new cards a little bit before they would otherwise play it online or in person in standard tournament events. And finally, the big boy is the constructed formats like Standard, Modern, or Legacy. When these formats are played, these are for the more dedicated players to play. Even though you can play them on a more casual level, generally if you're playing these formats, you can play in more constructed style events and tournaments that require a little bit more of a buy-in terms of cards than the previous ones. Progressing up this ladder is the only way to learn Magic, of course. However, by going in this sort of fashion, you have an easy way for players to slowly engage more and more with the community of Magic the Gathering and learn more and more about the cards that were printed and the cards that are going to see print in the future. It's also important to note that all of these are different valid stopping points if you really like to. If you don't ever want to play more than Commander, it is totally fine to continue engaging with Magic, only playing Commander, only playing Kitchen Table, only playing Limited. All of these being valid means that all your players have little communities that they can take a part of, but also progress from one to another as they please. But let's say you're not satisfied with having all these different little communities. You don't want to cut your player base amongst many different groups and would rather keep everyone centralized in one main card game. It's worth looking at Pokemon's approach, as Pokemon only has the one main format that every player plays as the standard format. One of the ways they keep it very accessible to new players is by printing very simple but powerful cards. Cards like Professor's Research and Super Rod are both very strong but have very basic abilities. Having cards like this that seem really simple on the surface, discarding your hand to draw 7 cards or shuffling 3 Pokemon or basic energy into your deck from your discard pile, they seem super basic and easy for new players to use. However, they show a lot of hidden depth when played at high levels. This level of easy to play and hard to master is really important when making your game very elegant and making it easy for new players to get into your game thinking it's relatively simple, but then only revealing the depth underneath once you play with a card a lot and realize that you can't play Professor's Research, discarding a key piece card from your hand, or need to save your Super Rod for when your Pokemon is knocked out to get a new chance at playing that Pokemon again. Only in Pokemon would you have a card like Lysandre's Trump card end up being banned, which seems like a totally rudimentary card. Shuffling your discard pile into your deck, including your opponent making it symmetrical, doesn't seem like a broken effect, but this card actually got banned in Pokemon due to its power level. By making your simple cards also overlap with your powerful cards, it leaves you a lot of room to introduce complexity into your game without overloading your players, especially your new players, with huge mechanics and lots of keywords. This helps Pokemon focus in on different Pokemon that may or may not be powerful enough. Pikachu in the games is completely horrible and sees basically no play. However, you can make a Pikachu that does tons of things in the card game because they have a ton of flexibility in terms of what mechanics they can put onto a Pikachu. But what if you want that complexity, that layer of depth underneath, the cards that don't look simple and are complicated but can be used in really interesting ways? What if you like the fast games in Yu-Gi-Oh! Want something that goes at a high pace, and you also like that interactive gameplay, the immediately getting to use something against your opponent from the very first turn of the game? My recommendation to you would just be playing the Edison format. The Edison format features a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh!'s best elements without overloading the new player experience. It uses a lot of the basics from Yu-Gi-Oh! And doesn't overload the player with the amount that they need to learn. Blackwing Bow with the Spear is a card that special summons, however there aren't that many cards that special summon in Edison, so it isn't overwhelming when you present a new player with a card that special summons itself. It still features lots of staples from the anime, keeping it relevant, like cards like Mirror Force. It still features Synchro Summoning, with cards like Goyo Guardian dominating the format and being super powerful boss monsters that you can summon. It even features hand traps, which I genuinely dislike, but cards like DD Crow having a small enough effect that it's easy to understand when you want to use it against your opponent make it a great card to play. Edison format still feels powerful. It still feels like you're making impactful plays from the very first turn of the game. It still feels like you have powerful monsters you can special summon out, and still has the hand traps that Yu-Gi-Oh! Is known for. However, it doesn't overwhelm new players by having a lot of cards with tons of words on them, a lot of deck searching, and a lot of mechanics that can overwhelm new players. This way, Edison becomes a format that is great for new players to get into and can still be entertaining for veteran players alike. But so far, I've only talked about other ways that the games have fixed this, so let's actually get around to fixing Yu-Gi-Oh! Itself in its current state. In my mind, Yu-Gi-Oh! Has two main issues which are easily solved by Konami and would massively improve the new player experience if they were solved. And the first of these are the massive branching one-card combos, present on cards like Snake Eye Ash, which can easily get you into a massive end board from a single card. Having generic search monsters like Snake Eye Ash get any level 1 fire monster from your entire deck and put it into your hand give your decks massive flexibility, as any level 1 fire monster in the entire game could go into your opponent's hand when they play down Snake Eye Ash, giving your opponent a huge amount of cards that they have to think about you possibly getting when you play it. This isn't even to mention a card like Small World, which can get you from one card to any other card in the entire game if you have the right card to bridge between the two. But in my opinion, the main problem with these kind of cards isn't the fact that they're really powerful, even if they are. It's the massive wall of text present not only on them, but on the cards they search. A card like Bonfire looks like a really simple card that could be present in any game, only getting a level 4 lower Pyro monster from your deck to your hand. But because of the way that Yu-Gi-Oh! Works, the Pyro monsters that you're going to search for often have a massive wall of text on themselves, and may not even be played out after you search them, meaning that you have to not only remember what the card your opponent searched for did, but then also be ready for them to play down that card, which probably searches another card from their deck, or special summon something from the graveyard that you now have to re-remember what it does. It's pretty clear in my mind that at some point Konami switched from having a game that was about inconsistency yet powerful effects to having a game with a ton of consistency but having a massive amount of complexity tacked onto it after the fact. Because almost every deck in the game is built around cards which search their deck for other key elements of their own archetype, it is extremely hard for a new player that doesn't specifically know what that archetype does or is revolving around to know not only what the opponent is doing, but what they should even begin to do in response, making new players extremely confused and very likely to go and find a deck which only does one thing no matter what the opponent does, which really diminishes the amount of gameplay they will actually see from Yu-Gi-Oh! And whilst I talk about the micro issue that's going on with Yu-Gi-Oh!, I haven't gotten into the macro issue, which I believe is the second big problem that could easily be solved by Konami. And that's that there's no simple on-ramp to actually get you into the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Outside of somebody showing you, which as I said before is a way that works for literally every game on the planet, so it shouldn't really be the default for Yu-Gi-Oh!, there is no easy way to get into a game like Master Duel. They have the tutorial in Master Duel, which does show you the basics, what normal summoning is, what a spell card does, how a trap card works, how to synchro summon, how to XYZ summon, etc. But even with the astounding number of tutorials in Master Duel, it still really just goes over the basics of how to play Yu-Gi-Oh! On the fundamental level. It also tries to introduce the archetypes to players, having these archetype spotlights that they can play through to get an idea of what every archetype in Yu-Gi-Oh! Does, but there's over 500 different archetypes present in Yu-Gi-Oh! And it would be completely unreasonable to expect a player to be able to know all of them. And because in Master Duel, there's no real signification for what different archetypes are good or bad or see a ton of play or are very difficult, there's basically no way for a player to have any idea what they should play without asking somebody else, meaning they're probably just going to pick a deck at random, whether or not the deck is good for new players or even something fun that they wouldn't want to play at all, or simply is completely unplayable in the meta at the time. They'll have absolutely no idea what they're doing, and there's basically no ropes to hold the player from falling off of Yu-Gi-Oh! Altogether. So let's address them. First is issue 1. I think Konami has already somewhat solved the issue about the massive amounts of searching and the huge text walls in Yu-Gi-Oh! By implementing different playable hand traps. A card like Nibiru or Droll and Lockbird definitely power down combo decks a large amount, massively limiting them on their ability to add cards to hand or to summon monsters to the field in a single turn, which makes it less likely opponents will be able to play against decks that do a massive summoning combo, especially if Droll and Nibiru become more prominent in the metagame. It's also prominent to note that they have also powered up hand traps over the years as they printed new hand traps, which definitely helps with powering down the combo decks of the metagame. Originally, we only had the card like Effect Welder, which only stops one effect monster, still a powerful effect nowadays. However, now we have cards like the Mulcharmies, which come down and can draw you a large number of cards at a fair price. These cards help focus on the main thing that the first issue is centering around, which is that the games need to see less cards in the first turn of the game. Having hand traps helps it so that way you can dilute your opponent's ability to play cards from their deck or cards from their hand in a single turn, making it much easier for you to focus on what you're trying to do rather than constantly thinking of what your opponent is. Having powerful hand traps not only makes it less likely for powerful decks that summon a lot or add a lot of cards from deck to hand to see tons of play in the metagame, meaning that new players will be less likely to run into them, but it also gives new players an easy way to understand the way to beat these decks. If you want to beat a deck that special summons a lot, put some Nibiru's in your deck. If you need to beat decks that add a lot of cards to hand, put in a Droll. I will say, however, this is a really tough thing for Konami to balance easily. Being able to prevent your opponent from doing a large monster combo when that's the whole focus of their deck can end up being really bad, especially when it is prominent enough that all the decks end up playing all of the hand traps, but also play all of the enablers, meaning that the game still hasn't been made actually any simpler. You've just added a lot of cards that are like maxi into your game, which completely make non-games happen. That being said, the addition of the Mulcharmies definitely shows me that Yu-Gi-Oh! Is walking in this direction of making more powerful hand traps that will hopefully help slow down the game in a meaningful way. Now for the second issue, which also has already sort of worked and been done by Konami before. It's by using alternate apps like Duel Links or like Rush Duel to help players get into the game from the very start. These games work a lot better as on-ramps to new players than Master Duel itself, even though Master Duel is the main way to play Yu-Gi-Oh! These games both do something really smart by having a completely different metagame from Yu-Gi-Oh! Altogether. And they also feature a lot of similar cards present from Yu-Gi-Oh!'s anime and the Yu-Gi-Oh! Game itself. By doing this, these games can both straddle the line between being a main Yu-Gi-Oh! Element, but also being something different that is friendly to new players. That way you don't have to upset the entire ecosystem of Yu-Gi-Oh! Itself, but can still introduce new players to the game in a meaningful way. By still featuring a similar way of playing the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! That players are familiar with from when they played back in the school ground days, it makes it easier for new players to get into the game as it looks familiar to what they are used to. However, these games still implement higher combo enablers and new mechanics to make it a little more complex, so that way players will have something more to engage with in the main game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Seeing something like Yu-Gi-Oh! Legacy of the Duelist really gives me hope that there are people who still want to play Yu-Gi-Oh!, remember watching the anime of the kid, and would love to get into the game if only there was some sort of bridge that would take them from a game like Legacy of the Duelist to the actual game of Master Duel. This is the ideal product in my mind to get a new player into the game, a different version of Yu-Gi-Oh! That is much more simplified and easy for players who are very, very fond of the old Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime to get into, but still have that bridge over to the real game or to Master Duel in some way. The one thing all of these titles are really missing out of, in my opinion, is some bridge to Master Duel or the real game altogether. Some way where it goes from playing the regular game of Duel Links to an easy crossover into playing the actual game of Yu-Gi-Oh! In paper or playing the game on Master Duel. Having your collection carry over, having you get some sort of currency in Duel Links that carries over to you getting packs in the real world. These are some things that other card games do and would definitely make it way easier for you to get into the actual game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Than just if you were to play Legacy of the Duelist online and then be like, okay, that's enough, I'm done with Legacy of the Duelist, and then not picking up Yu-Gi-Oh! Ever again. I think it's worth noting that doing these things won't solve everything for Yu-Gi-Oh! The new player experience is incredibly nuanced and takes a lot of work to put in to get new players into the game, and doing these things will not simply solve every new player problem. There's many other things that you could do to help the game that will help solve the new player issues other than the ones I've listed here. That being said, it's clear, at least in my mind, that Konami is trying to take steps in the right direction to make the new player experience better. For example, taking cards like Maxi, which are present in Master Duel, and replacing them with the Molcharmies, which are pretty clearly styled after a card like Maxi but more balanced, really show that Konami has in mind what they want to do with hand traps without overpowering the game altogether. It may seem like Konami oftentimes has it out for the game as it's been around so long and still has this new player experience, and even when they do blunder by ruining the Time Wizard rules for some reason and then rolling it back a few days later after everyone freaks out on Twitter, it's important to remember that it's clear that they do want to improve the game and make it better for not only new players but old players alike. So I do think that when you voice your opinion, it is really important to give it to Konami, tell them what we want, and tell them what they can help to do to make new people come into the game. So go out and make your voice heard. Maybe down in the comments down below this video, you can let me know how you'd help Yu-Gi-Oh's new player experience and make it better for new people coming into the game. Remember to like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this from me, and let me know how you would help out Yu-Gi-Oh's new player experience down in the comments below. Thanks for watching.